Hey, deserving listeners. Today, I want to talk with you about what therapists fight among themselves about. I said that in a weird way, almost like a Yoda-ish way. I want to talk about what therapists fight about. And the reason why I want to talk about it is that I recently on the therapist subreddit saw that someone had reposted a Facebook meme titled, "How to Get a Bunch of Therapists Arguing Starter Pack." And on this meme is just listed a bunch of topics that I very much agree are frequently fought about in today's world. And it's an interesting glimpse into the field of psychotherapy today in 2025 or in the 2020s. Because I know as an older therapist that we didn't fight about these things 10, 15, 20 years ago, at least for the most part. So let's just go line by line. And I'm going to try to be as quick as possible with each one because there's like about 20 of them. And there's so much to say about each one. And so let's see if I can manage to be concise for once. But, conciseness is the enemy of understanding sometimes. But let's see how we do. Okay, so I thought I would just start with the very first item and go in order just because I don't want to come across like I'm privileging one over the other. And so the first one here is polyvagal theory. And yes, absolutely, therapists fight very adamantly about polyvagal theory. And I'll tell you my own opinion on it. And when I first started to hear the debate, I'll tell you, I don't really have a firm opinion about this. I have some outsider observations of the debaters, but I first came across polyvagal theory as it's described. I can't remember the name of the person who was promoting this idea, but I first started hearing about it in the 2000s, like 2002 or something, but it had already been talked about in smaller circles by that point. I really started hearing more about it in around 2010, 2011. I remember when you're a professor at a university, you tend to just hear these kind of conversations, and students will talk about things and they'll ask about things. In academia, there's just a lot of talk about whatever is being talked about. And professors are paid to know things, and they're paid to understand the consensus and understand how to pull together a lot of different ideas. They're paid to respond to various questions. And so as a professor myself, hanging out with a lot of other very smart, very responsible, wise professors, you tend to understand. It helps in your knowledge base when you just are swimming in that pool, if you will. And I very quickly, early on, established an opinion about the polyvagal theory debate that I still have to this day. So there's a lot of things, as I think is true about any debated topic, whether it's politics or just between you and your spouse, that it's not just the topic that's being argued about. It involves a history. And to understand the debate around polyvagal theory, I'm realizing right now that I would have to lecture for an hour or two just about the history of somatic therapy and how even going back to Descartes in the 1400s, 1500s, there was this notion of separating the mind and the body and what defines the self. But suffice to say that in the patriarchal Western European American society, they definitely privilege this idea of the mind being different from the body, and that the body is something that is below the mind. It's sort of our primitive part of ourself. It might even be considered kind of feminine to be aware of your body or care about your body. And there's a whole understanding around this, and philosophers have been noticing this in our society for a long time, particularly outsiders to Northwestern European American society, mainstream American society. And as a result, you have a lot of therapists that have been ignoring the body and its importance, and also will criticize or will minimize the importance of theorists that step forward talking about the importance of the body in somatic work, right? The body keeps the score. I don't know if that's on this list. I don't see it, but this is very much related to that book by Howard Zinn, I think. I'm not sure. I have the book. I've read bits of it, and people have been asking me to do deep dives on polyvagal theory and the body keeps the score for the 17 years I've been making this podcast. And it's on the list for sure, and I hope to get to it at some point. But there's a whole backdrop to this theory, and when the polyvagal theory was put forth by a particular charismatic author, lecturer guy, I can't remember his name, it has the appearance of science, and it is, in that it is pulling from newer science regarding our neuronal system. And it has to do with a particular nerve that had some surprising new knowledge that came from understanding of that nerve. Anyway, and so what I'll say, and this might be true about a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today, that in the debate among therapists, there's wrong-headedness and right-headedness on both sides, probably to different proportions depending on what we're talking about. But when it comes to polyvagal theory, the people that are fans of the theory are right-headed in that the theory helps to focus and highlight the importance of the body, the importance of our nervous system, the importance of understanding trauma and the fight, flight, freeze, appease, faint response, to further expand and show empathy for people that have a wide variety of what would be considered to be problematic responses to stress, but is understandable when you understand how the nervous system works and the body works, and maybe how the polyvagus nerve works specifically. So there's a lot of, and that understanding leads to treatment models that are focused more on those issues rather than just talking all the time, right? It's just instead of just talking about cognitive ideas about automatic thoughts or what you can do, like coping mechanisms or something, it's like a better appreciation within the psychotherapy world and within sessions, talking with clients about how the body is involved. And there are certain charismatic authors that have tapped into that and are sometimes elevated to almost like a godlike status, some of these people. And they will start making claims that are beyond what the original science actually said, either because they've ran out of things to say or publish and they just need to say something more to get, because, once they've said the main body of the science, then they've run out of things to publish. And so people, I don't know if that's a factor, but it starts to get expanded beyond. And I think there's also a tendency for us to have a lot of questions, right, naturally, about human nature and trauma and stuff, and because there's just so much we just don't know, whether it's in psychology or astronomy or whatever, the meaning of life. There's just a lot of things that we just don't know. And when we come across a figure that has discovered or is pulling together science to actually answer a few of those millions of questions that we have, I think there's a tendency for us to think, well, if they know the answers to those questions, then they probably know the answers to a lot more. But they might not, actually. And I think that it's a systemic thing in that the charismatic figure and the fans will work together to push this beyond the safe zone of science and of credible claims that you can make. So I think that might have been what happened with polyvagal theory. So what happened was it was expanded way beyond what it should have been originally and kind of ruined the theory, in my observation, by painting, by pulling in a lot of different silly notions that are going too far. But the problem is that when the other side of the debate would say, whoa, 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 you're going too far, sometimes what that was, so on the anti-polyvagal theory, you have right-headedness and wrong-headedness as well. The wrong-headedness is this general notion of the body doesn't matter. And they would never say that they believe that, but that is kind of what they're operating from. And this separation of mind and body and a misunderstanding or just not appreciating what trauma can do to the body and the nervous system and the soul. But so you have wrong-headedness on the other side who will criticize polyvagal theory just because it involves the body or the nervous system or something. So you also have right-headedness on the anti-polyvagal theory, and that they will say, well, some of what you're saying is supported by science and we can get behind, but this other stuff we can't. Okay. So when the polyvagal theory fans hear criticism, they assume that it's coming from the wrong-headed criticism side of polyvagal theory, and they reject it. And this happens in politics all the time. You know, someone on your side of the aisle will say something that goes too far, and the other side of the aisle will even think that that's what you're saying by, you know what I mean? Anyway, so the people get more dug in. They start to dig in on each side. So you have the polyvagal theory people that'll say, you know, the people, they just don't understand. They always want to get rid of anything having to do with the body or having to recognize the nervous system or understand trauma. They don't understand. And what they don't do is they don't listen necessarily to the people that are saying, look, half of what you're saying I can get behind, but the other half is taking it too far. Because people are black and white thinkers, and it's just hard to think straight. So anyway, that's my as concise way as possible while trying not to piss off too many people. And I'm realizing now that I might piss off literally everybody because the people that talk about polyvagal theory are, in my observation, tends to be the wrong-headed side of each side. The right-headed side of each side tends to just back away because they don't care. They're just like, hey, part of your theory is good and part of it is not great. And then they just get caught in the crossfire and they're just like, okay, fine. I don't really care. This isn't a hill I want to die on. So I will no longer comment on that on Reddit or something. And that's me. And then I suppose the right-headed fans of polyvagal theory are either just being quiet because they're being overshadowed by the wrong-headed side, or they are so turned off by the wrong-headed side that they slowly back away from polyvagal theory over time. I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I've seen debates about polyvagal theory and thought, both of you are right in some ways and both of you are wrong in some ways. And if you just were able to take a step back and admit your side of things, just like in couple therapy, then the world would be better. Anyway, let's take a break. But before I take a break, I want to say that I'm guessing in this episode I'm going to be bothering some people. I think sometimes it's hard for me to picture that because I think that I'm being fair about the various different sides of things, but who knows? And what I'll say is that it's okay to disagree, and I can disagree with you, you can disagree with me, and we can all be one big family. And it doesn't mean horribleness, to disagree doesn't mean that we're bitter enemies or something. That's one. Two, sometimes people think they're disagreeing with me when they're bringing up a point that I didn't say. And because, the topics that are on this list are too big for a concise portion of a podcast episode. So yeah, there are definitely going to be sides of the debate that I'm not going to bullet point. And if you want to offer that, then fantastic, do it, please. I'd love to hear it. But don't frame it in a way, unless it is this way, that it's in opposition to anything that I said personally, because I'm trying to present various sides of this debate. And if you bring up a point, in all likelihood, if you were sitting here with me, I would say, oh yeah, totally. I didn't get into that because I didn't have time, or I didn't think of it, or I didn't know that. But I'm in agreement with that, and nothing I said was in opposition to that. You know what I mean? So just use your social skills. Let's take a break. All right, back from the break. This next item on the list is accepting versus not accepting insurance. And I don't see as hot of a debate about this. I do see people talking about this online and in person. So I'm not sure exactly what the meme is referring to, but often what I see people debating or arguing against each other about is, look, if you are a good person as a therapist, if you're an ethical, moral human being, then you will do what you can so that people who can't afford to pay the very high price of a private pay non-insurance. So if you don't know, where do I begin? So for me, I am Kirk. How are you doing? I'm a therapist and a professor and a podcaster. I don't know why, but if I'm referring to myself and I were to look for a therapist, then I would be shopping around, right? Word of mouth, but I would also go through my medical insurance and I would ask for for mental health care providers, for therapists who are listed as contracted providers, meaning that in all likelihood, those people I could use my insurance with, meaning that it'll be much less cost to me. But the provider will very likely be paid less overall than they would if they were just to charge the going rate in the market. So if I were younger and I wasn't making as much money, I would definitely have to use my insurance. Otherwise, it just wouldn't be possible, right? I might not even be able to afford the copay, which is like $20 usually, something like that. But now, because of you, the patrons and the YouTube members, I am able to. I have the freedom and the privilege, the extreme privilege of not only choosing a therapist from my insurance panel, but also I could choose a therapist who isn't contracted with my insurance provider, and I would just pay out of pocket. And in Seattle, I don't know what the average is, but anecdotally, it's about $200, which is what I charge, by the way. Most of my colleagues charge excess of $300 an hour, but my income isn't really dependent on my private practice, so I bring it all the way down to $200 an hour, which to me just sounds, because I started out charging, I don't know, like $40 an hour in the late 90s, and even accounting for inflation, that's a pretty drastic increase in my fee. And I, like most therapists, don't feel great about that. It feels sleazy. It feels bad. But when you're trying to pay your bills and you're trying to, like when I was in private practice only, you're a small business and you have to pay for your own insurance. You have to pay for your own vacation time. You have to account for a recession in which clients start to drop off, and you have to have a big nest egg to get you through those bad years. You have to pay rent usually. There's a lot of overhead, blah, blah, blah. And so even though a therapist might be charging $250 an hour, that might sound like, oh my God, they must just be rolling in money. And the fact is that in Seattle, the cost of living, it's such that a lot of therapists who are charging that amount are considered to be on the lower end of, below average in terms of keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak, if that makes sense. Now, compared to the rest of the world, they're rich as kings, you know what I mean? So it's not like but you get my point. So with accepting versus not accepting, the debate is, are we entitled as therapists to be a little self-centered or a little self-serving by not accepting insurance and able to make a lot more money. You can make 2 to 3 times more money if you don't use insurance and you live in a market that actually has enough people that would pay for therapy at that level. You know what I mean? So that's the debate. And I totally get that. And that's why in marriage and family therapy, I'm both in the field of psychologists and marriage and family therapy and counselors to some extent. But in marriage and family therapy, it's explicit in the ethics codes that we do what we can to actually give services, provide services for people in need. One category of need being economic need, right? So, and hopefully I would have done this regardless of that ethical code, but I've always provided pro bono services here and there. When my practice was bigger, I always had a certain percentage of my clients that were free. And I made sure that those clients needed that service. They wouldn't have been able to pay for it otherwise. And, you know, it was sort of like communism or socialism in a sense. It was like, well, if enough people are paying me at a certain rate, then I can easily volunteer my time for free in a certain percentage of my week, and everyone wins in a sense. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of ways to be moral and ethical along these lines outside of accepting versus not accepting insurance. There's also sliding fee scales, which a lot of therapists will have. I used to have something like that, meaning for the first 20 years of my career, and I supervise a lot of people that are like that as well. So I think that's what the debate is. I think another element of the debate is that for some therapists, they are in a market or at a certain point in their career, or they're just not really great at marketing in general. Because that was one thing I saw, is that in all the various therapists that I supervise in private practice, I saw a wide variety of ability when it came to marketing their practice, like just drastic differences. I would have 2 students that would graduate at the exact same time with the same grades. And I would have both of them as students in the program, and then they would hire me post-graduation as their postgraduate supervisor. And fast forward 2 or 3 years, and one of them would have a full practice charging at the upper end, even more than me. That was always odd when I would have a supervisee, a recent grad, who would be charging more than me like a year after graduation, which is fine, you know, because I, like I said, I'm not dependent on that, and people got to do what they got to do, right? And student loans are a problem. But so I would have one student that would be, they would have a waiting list essentially after 2 years. And then I would have another student that would have had a total of like 10 sessions with 2 clients spread out over 2 years. And which is basically a hobby. I think the IRS considers that income level as like, oh, you just have a hobby, like you have a crochet business on the side. Meaning that I don't think you have to file your taxes. Don't quote me on that, but talk to an accountant about that. But the point is that I think a lot of novice therapists, for various reasons, whether it's marketing prowess or not, are struggling with getting their practice off the ground, and they are angry and hurt and scared. And they start to look for a scapegoat, and they start fighting with people online. And I think that happens sometimes in this debate, because you have people that are just maybe jealous of others. You know, they'll hear stories of other novice therapists that are not accepting insurance and are, and they have a waiting list and they're charging $300 a session. And then you have someone else in another market with another marketing ability regarding their private practice, and they're just struggling, and they're having to take clients that they don't even really want to work with. They feel like they're begging their clients to keep coming because if they lose a client, it's like almost the end of their career to some extent, you know. And I just think that the debate in this arena is expressing that anxiety and that worry and that hurt and that resentment that some people have. Because to me, all of us therapists, I think, should be allowed to figure out for ourselves how we're going to navigate this. We as therapists, typically, we could have done a lot of things with our career. We could have got a lot of different sorts of master's degree or a lot of different post-bachelor's training. And if we were trying to make money, we would have done other things. We would have worked in tech or in engineering or something, or in crypto. I don't know. But we could have done that. And typically, people that have the privilege to go back to graduate school to become a therapist, they are in those circles because in middle class America, you rub elbows with people in those realms. Not all the time, but sometimes. And not every therapist is middle class by any means. But and that assumption is oppressive. I would have students that would remind me, even because I would talk along those lines. They'd be like, by the way, I'm not middle class. I'm working class. I've always been working class. I was homeless 3 years ago. So stop assuming that all of us come from the same background that you do. So I can appreciate that. But anyway, what was I talking about? And yeah, I lost my train of thought. I was talking about how we could have done a lot of things with our time and energy, and the energy it takes to become a therapist is quite robust. And so we could have dedicated ourselves to money, but we dedicated ourselves to an occupation that involves making the world a better place. And so even if we are a little so-called greedy, we're still in a realm of making the world a better place. We're not polluting the environment. Outside of driving our car to our office or something, we're not in an industry that is ruining society. We're trying to help, and we're purposely dedicating our blood, sweat, and tears to do that. And we know that we're taking a pay hit when we choose this. And in fact, for many, it's a massive pay hit compared to what else you could be doing. And so even if you're a little greedy, you're still on the right side of, things in terms of ethics and help and goodness and nobility, really. And not to pat myself on the back, but I'm patting all of us on the back. And I hope I'm making sense of it. Anyway, I need to go faster if I'm going to get through these. All right, so this next one, I'm going to go as fast as possible. This next item, the third item out of 20, is Masters of Social Work versus. So it's the way it's specifically written is MSW versus MFT versus LPC versus PhD versus PsyD. And in more common language, this would be social workers versus marriage and family therapists versus counselors versus PhD level, psychologists and therapists versus PsyD level psychologists. And I've talked about this before, but in our field, this one is old. This goes before Reddit, for example, that the different professions, as we call them, within mental health, and I guess this doesn't include psychiatrists, right? Yeah, there's no MD on there, and there's no psychiatric nurse on there, which is another profession. But yeah, non-medical fields are very notorious for their history of fighting with each other and downplaying each other. You will see doctoral level people that will say that master's level people don't know what they're doing because they don't have as much education as a doctoral level person. And that makes sense intuitively, but it doesn't bear out in outcomes data. When we study this, and generally speaking, there's no difference in outcomes across the different professions, whether you have a master's degree or a doctorate. Because doctorates don't involve more education about psychotherapy. Doctorates involve extra education about non-therapy related topics like research, supervision, education, or other specialties. If you wanted to say, are doctoral level people better able to read and conduct research in general? The answer is yes, because they all have education, as far as I know, in that. Whereas master's level people either have minimal to no education around that, because you don't need to know how to conduct research to be a clinician. It can help, maybe, but it also can distract. Because I have both. I have both the master's level marriage and family therapy education, but I also went back to school and started over and got another master's in the psychologist realm. I have a PsyD, and then a doctorate. So I saw what both fields are educated on. And I saw a lot of people in the PsyD, the psychologist realm, who were inundated with so many topics, because to become a psychologist, you have to learn everything about everything. And it can easily dilute the counseling theory and practice, easily. I saw students that were at the end of their degree after, 5-6 years of just wall-to-wall education and internships. I saw them graduating with like 10% the knowledge that I saw with the typical student in the master's program. Because in a master's program, that's all you do, generally speaking, is how to be a therapist. Here is a technique. Here is a research study about therapy. Here is the ethics around being a therapist. Here is the professional life of a therapist. Here is how you start a private practice. Here is this theorist who developed this idea of how people work in the therapy office. Here's a story about myself because in the psychologist realm, you could have half or more of your professors who have never even been a clinician. Because to be a psychologist doesn't necessarily mean that you are a therapist. You can be a psychologist and only do research. You can be a psychologist and only be in the realm of medications. A colleague of mine, he's a psychologist. He's not a medical provider or professional, but he dedicated himself to understanding psychotropics and pharmacology, and so that's what he does. But he's never been a therapist. In his 40-year career, he's never seen a client. So, whereas in the master's programs, typically, and in my program, at least historically, that was a requirement. Not only did you have to have established yourself as a very competent therapist based on your career before you would be hired as a professor, but you actually, by definition, had to sustain your practice as you taught at the university. Part of our contract was that we were given Mondays off so that we could see clients. And so back in the day, I don't think it's this way anymore, but back in the day, all of us professors would have, 8 clients on Monday. And that keeps you abreast of the reality of being a therapist so that you don't lose touch of what you're teaching your students about. Anyway, so that's just that topic of the debate about who's better at and blah, blah, blah. But the reason why the different professions typically fight is because you have people within the professions that are insecure about their viability as a profession, as someone that can generate revenue to pay your bills. And so you start to attack other people. It's sort of like if you're the owner of a McDonald's franchise and a Burger King franchise is down the street. Well, when things are good and you're turning customers away because you can't make enough burgers, then you don't care about the Burger King down the street. But when there's a recession or there's a downturn in demand for burgers and fries, and you're starting to lay people off from your McDonald's franchise, well, you're going to get upset and worried, and you're going to look for someone to vent towards, someone to scapegoat or someone to hate. And that Burger King down the street is a very easy target, and that's exactly what happens among social workers, counselors, marriage and family therapists, PhD, and PsyD people. That's exactly what's it. Okay, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. Okay, I've got to go faster. And if you're playing your bingo card a game, then the box that says Kirk Kirk declares he's going to go faster and then doesn't go faster, you have several check marks in that box. So this next item, the fourth item, is collaborative documentation. And I don't see heated debates about this, but I do see talks about it. And similar to the polyvagal theory, I think that there's right-headedness and wrong-headedness on both sides. So to talk about the right-headedness side of collaborative documentation, so what it is, at least I believe this is what they're referring to, is when there was this movement, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, to, I don't know if you'd call it a movement or I don't know what you'd call it, but it was this movement to have, or this pressure to therapists to do your documentation with the client in the office. So typically we would see a client, they would leave, and then we would either spend the next 10 minutes or 5 minutes, or at the end of the day, we would document that session. And that's the way it had been done for a long time, and that made the most sense, right? But I think this might have even come to us from the medical field. And the idea was that it's collaborative. It's collaborative with the client. The client is involved. And when you do it that way, you can help the client understand that they're a part of the process. The client feels more in power. It gives you a chance to review certain important things that you should be reviewing. Like, well, on the treatment plan, it said you came in because you wanted to talk about your marriage and you wanted to talk about your anxiety. And I'm seeing that now as I'm looking at the notes in the last 5 minutes of the session, and I'm asking myself as a therapist, did we address that in today's session? And the client might say, actually, no. I was kind of thinking that, but I actually liked what we were talking about. But maybe we should reorient ourselves to the treatment plan because I do really want to talk about my marriage and my anxiety. Those are bigger things. So maybe we both got a little off track. And so it's this. There's a lot of things like that can emerge out of a collaborative note-taking treatment plan visiting moment at the end of the session. You can also use this opportunity as a therapist to say, how do you think I did today? I always have a little thing in here about asking my clients if you got something out of today, or would you have liked something to have been different? So I'll jot that down so I'll remember that next time. Okay. So that's the pro side, and that sounds great, right? On the other hand, to talk about the wrong-headedness side of the collaborative documentation is this almost religious notion that to not do it this way is to be patriarchal towards the client. It's this notion that anything that is not of the contemporary way of doing things, that is oppression informed or feminist informed or something, is somehow a part of the patriarchy, because it can be framed as, look, you're this objective observer on high as a therapist, and then at the end of the session, you are going to alone declare certain things that happened in session, and you don't care about what the client believes. Okay, so that's the wrong-headed side of, and there's other wrong-headed elements to the fervor around collaborative documentation. Now, behind the scenes, what is pushing collaborative documentation often are managers, people that don't necessarily care about client care, and what they care about is quote-unquote productivity, i.e. revenue and overhead and profit. And so what they're concerned about is that they have a bunch of therapists that are demanding extra time to be able to fill out their paperwork. And when they heard about this collaborative documentation movement, they're like, ooh, then we don't have to pay our therapists extra time to do paperwork because now they're expected to do it in session. And ultimately what this meant was that client care would be reduced because time would be taken away. You know, it's sort of be like your therapist taking the last 5 minutes out of your session to do their own taxes or something. You know, it's like, this is something you need to be doing on your time. Don't waste my time. I'm paying for an hour or 50 minutes of therapy, and we're spending the last 5 minutes doing your paperwork. Like, I don't get anything out of this, And so the managers, of course, love this because of profit, right? It also is a manager's dream because the documentation tends to be better because the therapist is dedicating the time to do this as a habit. Because a lot of managers and supervisors, myself included, will sometimes I never did this. Well, I did this work sometimes, but any supervisor who works for an agency knows that half or more of their job is getting on their supervisees' asses to get their paperwork done. Because so many, particularly some, and if you're a therapist who's one of these people, you're one of these therapists who procrastinates on your paperwork. And it can be a big problem legally, ethically, practically. And how do you strong arm a therapist? Whereas if you can just get everyone to do their notes during the session as a matter of habit, then you don't have to hound so that's the wrong-headed side of collaborative document. The right-headed side of the anti-collaborative documentation is, look, that's not my style. I have other ways of assessing that. I have other ways of working collaboratively. I don't have to pull out my laptop to ask my client if the session was worth it to them. We have a lot we have to talk about, and I don't want to demean the process, and I don't want to take time away from my client. I can manage my paperwork on my own, and I have my own way of making sure that what's in my notes reflects what my client wants me to put in there. So get off my back. And so that's the right-headed side. That's me, by the way, because I didn't grow up as a therapist with collaborative documentation being a thing. And so it's just not my style. If I had to, if a supervisor made me, I'd make it work, and maybe I could absolutely make it work for me, but it's just not really my style. I think this lends itself to a CBT kind of style. Now, certainly if you're a psychoanalyst, you can also do this kind of stuff, but if you're a CBT person, you're already doing paperwork with the clients anyway. Not all the time, but CBT often involves worksheets and writing down, keeping track of things with numbers and with automatic thoughts and stuff anyway. And that's all good work, but so it sort of lends itself to that. The wrong-headed side of the anti-collaborative documentation movement is to just highlight that this is a money grab or a manager tyranny of some sort, without recognizing that there's a group of pro-collaborative documentation people that can absolutely make it work and make it very pleasant. In fact, enhance, if you're into it and this is in line with your style and you own it as a therapist, as a style to do this kind of thing, it can actually be a powerful tool, even if you don't work within CBT. It just has to be something that you buy into as a therapist. So there's that. And for the sake of conciseness, let's just move on to another topic. Okay, so the next item on the list is hugs. The debate about hugging clients. And yeah, I have seen people debate this, but I don't know. In my circle, most people are in my camp, or I should say I represent the consensus within my circle, generally speaking, in that they will say they don't tend to initiate hugs, but if a client wants to hug for a brief period, just like there's different kinds of hugs, right? There's a warm goodbye hug that is, I don't know, it's sort of interesting to talk about in explicit terms. Like you firmly press someone, right? You hug, but then as soon as you do that, you immediately release in a warm way. Whereas you might hug like your spouse much, much longer than just the initial press in, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? And also there's the courtesy hug or the hello hug, the hug you might give an extended family member. I come from a family of huggers, and I'm in a hugging circle. I hug everyone that comes into my house, whether it be a very warm hug like with Bob, or a very courtesy hug like with Umberto. He doesn't really like hugging, so I try to accommodate on that level. But yeah, so that's now we have to understand the bigger picture as therapists, which is the debate, which is, I guess, to follow my framework of right-headedness and wrong-headedness on each side. On the right-headedness of hugging, pro-hugging, is the side that says, look, therapy is about human connection. It's not a technical affair. It is about empathy and warmth and possibly even the L word, love, as Bob says. He and I both will say therapy is a loving act. I love my clients. I want to have love, a certain kind of love, right? And hugging can be a part of that. Hugging doesn't have to be a part of that, but it can be. Some therapists might even initiate hugs. I have colleagues like the late Jerry Saltzman, a colleague of mine at Antioch. He was you just had to meet him. He was the most disarming person you could ever meet. He didn't give off a creepy vibe at all, and he was sweet and nice and short and slight and non-aggressive, and he could get away with hugging just about anybody. Now, are there people that would be put off by him hugging? I don't know, but I'm guessing, yeah, maybe. But maybe not to a huge degree, but maybe like for people that have a particular thing against, because some people just don't want to hug, right? So for whatever reason, trauma or just preference or overstimulation or whatever, and that should be respected. And so for that reason, I generally recommend that therapists don't initiate hugs. Now, you could, as a therapist, if this was your style, to say, hey, it's my style to hug spontaneously, and I have that urge right now as a matter of warmth, not as a matter of creepiness. But I don't want to do something that's non-consensual. So if you don't want to hug, completely fine. Just say, not your thing, and I will be totally fine. But if you want to hug, then a very brief platonic therapist-client hug is something that I feel like I want to do. Now, end of role play. Some people might say that whole thing was creepy, but sometimes consent sounds a little funny. And as I always say, if being healthy means being corny, then be corny and healthy. What's my saying go? By the way, I just reflexively looked at my merch because sometimes I happen to have that tumbler, that coffee tumbler, the one that says if whatever I say. It's funny. As soon as that became a merch item, the idiom that I made up is gone. I can't say it because I'm trying to say someone else's saying, which is my saying that's printed on Psychology Together merch. I'm no longer just saying it from the heart, if that makes any sense. Anyway, but what I am looking at is a coffee tumbler that says, my cat wants to chime in. Stacy actually designed this whole thing. She actually took Michelle, is the cat in the merch, and Stacy actually painted Michelle many years ago and scanned that painting and then made it into a digital part of this meme or this merch item. And by the way, Stacy takes the merch very, very seriously, and she worries about it a lot when there are problems with people getting their orders or with the quality not being good. And every month or so for the past number of years, she will come to me in a state of panic because the merch company wasn't being responsible, or the item wasn't up to snuff or something. And we always get samples to make sure that they're of good quality. Well, the merch outfit that we were working with was getting worse and worse and worse over time. And some of you who ordered merch might have experienced this, where it took months to get what you ordered or not get it at all, or it would be bad quality or something. And so, and the merch company wasn't even paying us. Stacy would withdraw the funds, and months would go by, and I was doing accounting, and I'm like, wait, I thought this accounts receivable would have been paid already. And so I went to Stacy, and she's like, oh yeah, I guess they had. So she reached out, and the company said, yeah, we're having trouble paying our creators. and it's just like, what? Like, that sounds like you're going out of business. So that was just the last nail in the coffin. And Stacy had already been researching a different merch company, and after much consternation and prep, made the switch rather recently. So if you had trouble with merch in the past, that should be a thing of the past. And I think this new merch company, which I can't even remember the name of right now, but it doesn't really matter to you, because if you just go to Psychology Seattle merch on our website or something, or on YouTube, it's a banner ad. I think that's consistently below our YouTube videos. It'll just take you to it. But I think the merch is better in a lot of ways. And the tumbler is similar but better, and I use it every day. I use the Psychology Seattle merch coffee tumbler. It is exactly the right size. It is insulated, right? It has a good cap on the top, and the design is better because instead of it being a stainless steel or aluminum or metal with the merch design printed on it, they actually coat the whole thing in white, and then they put the design over that. So I don't know, it just has a better quality. It feels higher quality for some reason. The shirts are great. I wear them all the time, and they do fade over time. I don't know about this new company, but when you wash a shirt after you wear it every time, eventually it starts to get a little ratty along the edges. But I think this new company is even better in that department. Anyway, the other thing is that I don't talk about now that I'm realizing it, just talking about this sort of stuff, is that I'm not on Cameo anymore. I have talked about this pretty extensively on the YouTube channel, but if you don't watch the YouTube channel, you wouldn't know, or you don't watch the end of my videos, because that's tend to where I put this kind of stuff. I canceled my Cameo because the app was so dysfunctional on my various different Android phones. And it made it impossible to fulfill. I mean, sometimes literally impossible. Someone would order something and I wouldn't be able to fulfill the Cameo because the app would glitch out so hard that, long story short, I just couldn't, because sometimes I would be able to redo it, which happens sometimes. I would have to redo a Cameo like 5 times or something. It becomes very frustrating when an app craps out literally 75% of the time. And so I finally just said, I can't do this anymore because the customers are being screwed. It's one thing to screw me over. It's another thing to get the customer screw over. So I canceled Cameo, but then I had this thought of, well, maybe I could just do it on my own. I mean, it's not that hard. So I spent a lot of time creating a system and a page on our website, psychologyseattle.com, and it's called a Kirkgram, like Telegram or whatever. In high school, I was in vocal jazz, and we had this thing that you could buy for, I think, $1 or $2, maybe $3, where students could buy it was like a vocal, a singogram, maybe that's what it was called. And we would dress up in these funny Valentine's Day pink outfits with us guys would wear like tutus and stuff. And we would put makeup on, and it was just an excuse for vocal jazz theater types to be obnoxious in class. And so we had full permission to, in the middle of class, just barge in the middle of a lecture and give a singogram. We would sing in pretty good a cappella harmony, like all of me, pain in my heart, just all of me, and then we would love on a student and then walk out. And so Kirk Graham kind of reminds me of that. But and I guess similarly, sometimes I'll I'll write a little jaunty song in a Kirk Graham for someone's birthday or something. So you can go to the website. Also, I really want to promote that still on Cameo is Umberto and Rebecca and Bob. And when y'all order a Cameo from them, which is rare, they love it. It is they don't see the emails and the comments the way that I do, the way Stacy does. When I get emails and comments about them, I will forward it to them when I think of it, but I don't always think of it. But to get a Cameo from y'all is a huge deal. So, it's a gift for everyone when you get a Cameo from them. Even if you're just looking for a pep talk or something, So partake in that if you were thinking about it, or if you didn't know that Bob, because I don't talk about it enough on the audio podcast anyway. So please, if you're into that sort of thing, get a cameo from Bob, Rebecca, and Umberto. They take it so seriously because it doesn't happen very often, and they aren't, as podcasters, they have to adhere to my kind of agenda, right? But when they're given the reins to do a little cameo, I just see them revel in the freedom to just say whatever they want to without being edited by me or something, So, do that. But anyway, so hugs, back to hugs. On the wrong-headed side of the pro-hug debate are people that will say that they should be allowed to hug whoever they want to and blah, blah, blah. Oh, another thing on the right-headed side of the pro-hug is that there are cultural differences. There are some people who live in a cultural pocket, whether it's a non-mainstream American culture or it's like my family, like my, I think it was my grandma, my Japanese grandma, who was also a hugger. I remember her, I'm just reminded of this. She told me that she went through a really horrible bout of depression later in life, which makes me just so sad to hear. And she was really appreciating working with this therapist. And at the end of session, she wanted to hug him just because that's who she was. And I can't remember how it went down, but it was enough of I don't know if they ended up hugging or not, but it was enough of a interesting moment that she talked with me about it. And it really helped me to see what it would be like to be on the other side of things, to be a client, and especially someone that doesn't understand how therapy rules work, and you're just like, hey, I need a hug. And to have a therapist say, oh, I'm sorry, it's unethical for me to hug you, can feel very demeaning, can make a client feel like they don't matter, can make a client feel like they're beneath the therapist, maybe like the therapist doesn't really care, like you're just a job to them. So that's on the pro side. On the pro wrong-headed side, there are people that will just say, I get to do whatever I want to, and you can't stop me, or something. I don't know. There are certain proponents of hugging and general somatic work in therapy that can be a little dogmatic or overzealous. On the anti-hug side are right-headed and wrong-headed. On the right-headed side, you have anti-hug therapists that are saying, look, you can't guarantee that a client is going to be harmed by that. There's a lot of trauma that gets played out. You certainly, as a therapist, should never initiate a hug, because plenty of people will agree to hugging you because they don't feel like they have the power to say otherwise, or they might not even know that it's uncomfortable to them and they're being harmed in the process. So yeah, the wrong-headed side of the anti-hug debate is they will say that it's always unethical to hug your client, that kind of shit. And that's just so stupid. And there's other sides of this, but that's what I'll say. Okay, I have 15 more to go, and I'm realizing I'm not going to get to it all in this episode. So I'm going to do a part 2. So tune in next time when I continue to, in a very, very concise manner, go through these items that were posted on the therapist subreddit regarding how to get a bunch of therapists arguing. And until then, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.